This is Kevin Pruitt with another episode of Rising Tide Startups, and my guest today is Lydia Lee. Lydia, thanks for joining us tonight.
Hey,
Today
thank
it's
you so
it's,
much.
it's
It's
morning your
morning.
time.
It's
That's right.
early morning, evening for you. We're across the continent, but we're going live.
Absolutely. I think if we drilled a hole right through the earth, we'd probably meet each other. So
That's
tell
right.
tell our listeners a little bit about Lydia Lee.
Well, I'm the founder of Screw the Cubicle, and I think the name kind of is pretty self-explanatory.
Very
But
self-explanatory.
yeah, I mean, but primarily, a lot of people will say, "Yeah, this is the girl I come to quit my job," right? And that is one part of it, one piece of the puzzle. But primarily, I really focus on helping people not only quit their job, but actually transition into work that they can love, right?
Mm,
I definitely did this mistake, and I think part of why I created Screw the Cubicle as my second business was because my first business was something I did start that made great profit, but had no meaning. And
mm,
I'm someone that's built as someone that needs to wake up in the morning doing something that is fulfilling.
yeah.
And that was actually the reason why I left corporate. It wasn't just about the commute. Yes, part of it was that, but a lot of it was that I didn't really want to I wanted to make a living doing something I liked doing, and
Yeah.
I think there's something quite special about that and sustainable about that.
Right.
And so I really help corporate professionals really repurpose
Mm-hmm.
talents that they have, especially people that are multi-passionate. That's like, what should I start? Because I'm good at
Mm,
everything. I help them laser focus to what it is that they can contribute to today that's in their strongest expertise, and repurpose that into a business that they can start on a digital level. It doesn't have to be online based,
right.
but most people that come to me do like the idea of location independency. I
Sure.
definitely live that concept
Yeah.
in my life at the moment. So I'm the girl that people come to before they understand what business to start and why they want to start it, and how to do that as a bit of a side hustle before they actually throw in the towel and quit their job.
Well, I want to drill down a little bit because you kind of in your bio, I mean, you're trying to cram your lifestyle into a minute and a half here, but
Right.
so walk us back to that date when you're sitting there in your corporate gig and you're going, I'm done. I am done with this. What's the thought process? I mean, I think our listeners would really, even if we spend the rest of the time talking just about that, I think our listeners
Yes.
would really love that because that's such I mean, such a timely kind of zeitgeist topic right now that
Mm-hmm.
people are saying, this whole millennial age is saying, hey, you know what, we have one life and we want to live it with purpose, and we want to do something that's going to matter. And sitting there in the cubicle figuring out how many numbers are in a spreadsheet, that doesn't lend itself to adding value. So take me back to that day. You're sitting there. What were you doing exactly in the corporate scene?
Yeah, listen, I had been having that thought process of I needed to leave my job for many years. And I
Mm,
think a lot of people can relate to that. I mean, there's these
absolutely.
success stories you hear, and you're like, some people tell the story of, oh, one day I just woke up and decided to take control of my life. And then
That's
six
right.
figures later,
Yeah, that's
and
right.
it doesn't actually happen
15
that
days
way,
and six figures later. That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it really isn't. That's the sexy story that a lot of
Sure.
people like to tell. The reality story I like to tell is that there's an immense amount of suffering that
Mm,
happens before you make that decision.
yeah.
But the minute you make that decision, things do get better. But it takes years sometimes to make that decision. I mean, my story is the same. I'm not actually that brave of an individual, to be honest.
Mm,
I came from. I was born in Malaysia. We immigrated to Canada when I was 8 years old. I learned a lot of old ways of
mm,
living and
right.
happiness and success from my parents.
Sure.
Asian parents. I don't know if you've ever heard of Asian moms. They're called tiger moms for a reason. There's a lot of pressure in Asian culture to make something of yourself, and especially when my family has given up so much to
Mm,
immigrate to Canada.
exactly.
There's a sort of like, do something with your degree, for God's sakes,
Right.
make something of yourself. And so when I did decide, or was entertaining even the idea of leaving my corporate six-figure job, that was something. It wasn't just leaving, it
Oh
was
yeah.
disappointing my mother.
No doubt
It was
about it.
sort of like there was an economic crisis happening in Vancouver at the time. My friends were getting laid off, and here I was in a cushy job, getting to travel 6 months of the year to fancy places, and I'm like, I don't want this job. It feels a bit like, am I having a midlife crisis too early?
That's right.
Like, is that
I'm
what's going on?
24 and I'm having a midlife crisis. That's right.
That's right, exactly. So it was many, many years of dissatisfaction, many years of not even taking holidays. I was someone
Mm,
that had a lot of student loans. I'm sure a lot of your guys
yeah.
will will,
They'll
will
certainly
resonate
relate.
with
That's
that.
right.
Yeah, and so I didn't take a holiday at the time of my burnout, right? I didn't take a holiday for 2 years. I kept getting paid out every year
Mm.
because I was in charge, in my corporate gig, I was in charge of a department
Mm-hmm.
and there were commissions
Yep.
attached to that department. So every time I left, I had a panic attack. So I never really even had a holiday anyway,
Mm.
so I had that anxiety coming back to work. So I just never took a holiday, which wasn't healthy. And
Yeah.
that wasn't something that I knew, obviously, until the burnout happened. So this sort of happened around 2015 when I was traveling to Russia. I was on a trade mission with the Embassy of Canada. I used to work in international education,
Mm-hmm.
worked for some big private schools in Canada, promoting education in Canada. And I was in Russia and Moscow in the dead of winter in February of 2015. And it might be a combination of jet lag, hotel room, and being on the road for about 30 days at the time, but I couldn't get out of that hotel room. I had about 8 to 10 appointments, I had to do back to back to make my living. And I went, what am I doing here? I'm
Mm.
lonely. I haven't seen my friends, my spouse. Like this is not the life that I signed up for, even
Right.
though my bank account told me that I was successful,
Yeah.
but yet I didn't feel successful. And it's funny when that moment hits you of reality and a truth bomb, it's depressing because
Mm.
you're like, oh my God, I've wasted how many years getting to a destination I didn't even want to get to.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
That
know,
that's a great
it's
great
hard,
synopsis.
isn't
I
it?
mean, just the idea. I think the Russian winter alone would have been enough to cause me to do a career change. But I understand the idea of burnout, and you're sitting there going, at some level, the zeros that they don't have the
Mm,
same value as they, you just keep adding
for
zeros to the end of the
sure.
paycheck, and you're
For
thinking,
sure.
life
Absolutely.
is too short
Yeah.
for this. So
Absolutely. And I can imagine for people who are, let's say, in their 50s, right? And they've been in an industry for 20 years,
right.
that really feels like a lot to give up. It's your identity. Your job has been our identity.
Yep.
The first thing we get asked when we go to a party is, what do you do?
Yep.
And if you can't answer that correctly, you feel like a nobody, like you don't fit in really, at that point. So that, it actually, to be honest, as I said, I wasn't very brave to go, hey, I'm taking control of my life and I'm going to quit my job. It actually required some pain. It required this burnout moment. It required me to develop this short-term
Mm.
agoraphobia where
Yeah.
I was so tired and so
Wow.
unhealthy that I couldn't leave the hotel room. Became very depressed. I had to call my boyfriend at the time and said, I think I need to come home. Something's going on. I'm having a bit of a panic attack. And I did in that hotel room. I couldn't go to work that day. And eventually I had to take a sabbatical,
Mm.
which is for health reasons at the
Yeah.
time. But of course, as anyone does when they're feeling depressed, is they see a therapist, which I did. And thank goodness, this is the same therapist I still have today. Didn't shove a bunch of pills down my throat and told
Mm-hmm.
me to just get some Prozac, but really asked me some tough questions about what is causing that unfulfillment. Is it really just a job? Is it what you're doing? Is it what you've done to get there?
Mm.
What are those things that no longer line up in your values that maybe you learned back in the day from your parents and society, but no longer is effective,
Right.
in where
Right.
you need to go. And I think we need to have these stop points to evaluate is what we're doing currently, the
Mm.
activities, the focus, the time and energy we spend on anything
Yep.
leading us to results we want to have or a life experience we want to have, or it isn't, right? And we have to be honest. And that was my transition turning point moment, right? Where a breakdown became a breakthrough,
Mm-hmm.
partly because I sought support for that.
Right.
And that sort of became that new trajectory for me. What is my version of success? Do I even need to make six figures? Like, what is that about? And so that caused me to evaluate all sorts of things in my life. And then after knowing a bit of clarity about, what isn't working, that helped me to get to what could be
Right.
working and experiment a little bit with that. Not quitting
Sure.
my job right away. I'm not the kind of girl that jumps off a cliff and hope
Mm-hmm.
the parachute opens. Most people aren't
Or hope
that
you
kind of
actually have
brave
a parachute
soul.
with you.
Yeah, I know, right? Especially people with kids and things like that. I
Yeah.
didn't have children, thank God. But it's a hard decision to change your life, and it
Yeah.
took some time. We have to dedicate some time to that discovery. So I kept my job. I limited my hours a little bit because of the health concerns, but I did take some time to work with a therapist, work with a coach to figure out what was my career,
Right.
if I could do something different. But what was actually easiest for me to start at the moment was actually remaining in the industry that I knew very well about, but creating something independently. So what I did was negotiate it in that span of 9 months of discovery. I negotiated a consultancy role with my job at the time, which was sort of a safe place. It
Yeah.
wasn't like completely quitting, but
Right.
I thought, hey, I am valuable here. They do need me,
Mm-hmm.
but how do I do this without suffering, continue to suffer in the 9 to 5 role? Actually, mine was like 9 to 9. How do I do this sustainably? So I did negotiate a consultancy role to take on a particular territory I was good at, outsource the rest to someone new that I would train, and they would still keep a part of my talents there. And they were okay with that for the first 6 months. And then I started my side business of an agency,
Yeah.
right, independently in that
Kind of
industry
in that
as a
same
consultant.
space, though, right?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that felt really easy. And you know what? A lot of people do this as a sort of the
Hmm.
first inaugural step,
Right.
what I call the transition step,
Right.
right? Not the forever step that you'll
Sure.
do till you die, but just something to get you out of that funk, get you out of the commute, get you out of going to the office every single
I
day.
don't think that
And that did
exists
work.
anymore. I don't think that forever
Yeah.
step exists anymore. I really don't. I think, if you look at our lives, we almost need to look at them as windows of time, or that this is
Love
kind of
that.
the epoch or the era or whatever that I'm in today. But 5 years from now, it'll probably look completely different. And I like that idea of kind of the
100%.
transitional step. And so,
Mm,
one thing that you mentioned that I think will really interest our listeners too is the kind of the differences between the Canadian system and the U.S. system. I mean, the biggest issue that most people have when they want to step out to freelance or consultancy or whatever is insurance. And
mm,
so, in the Canadian system, it's provided as part of kind of the like the UK system, kind of a national healthcare type
sure.
system. You step out here, and if your spouse doesn't have insurance, or to buy it independently outside of your careers is really
Mm,
expensive. So that to
mm.
me from my experience here in the U.S. has been the biggest deterrent for people to kind of go independent. Is the insurance
Yeah.
issue.
For sure. And we actually do have to look at the numbers clearly too, right?
Right.
Like,
That's a good point.
and I agree with you that insurance is expensive, but also so are taxes. So are,
Yeah.
like, for example, when I was making $150,000 at my salary, I'm like, oh, I'm making $150,000. I have to make the same amount in my business to really say that I have a permission now to
Mm.
quit if I can make the same amount of money. But actually, if I actually look at the taxes, and I don't know how the taxes are like in the States, but once you make a certain bracket of income, you're taxed 40% of
Wow.
your income. So I wasn't taking home
Sure.
150,000,
Sure.
right? I was taking home 40, like 60% of that.
Yeah.
Plus, if I divided that 60% by the hours I actually did to make that amount,
Yeah.
I was actually making less than my assistant. So you see the
Wow.
reality check, right?
And the
So it's like
commuting
maybe,
time and the
and the commuting
stress and
time, the
yeah.
stress. I mean,
Wow.
what is the true cost
Yeah.
of making that
Yeah.
60%? So it's the same sort of advice I would give for anyone going, insurance is expensive. Yes, that's correct. But so is taxes. So if you were to be an independent consultant, you could have tax breaks
Yeah.
potentially, right? You may not get insurance anymore, but could you afford insurance on your
Yeah.
own if you were to make, keep
Yeah.
more of your money?
Yeah.
That might be an option. Or could it be that you might have to make some changes in your lifestyle? That's something
Heaven
that is still
forbid people would have to
unsexy.
make
Heaven
changes.
forbid you don't watch Netflix all the time and eat
Oh,
out all the
what am I
time.
gonna
And,
do?
what are we going to do? But we have to, right? Value,
Yeah.
we spend money and on what are the things we value, right? And so if this new life change or freedom or the idea of flexibility is of value to you, we have to prioritize that above our gym memberships, above our Netflix subscriptions, above our fancy French dinners, right?
Mm.
And if we can find ways to cut costs, maybe even move out of that 4-bedroom house that we have,
Yeah.
rent it out, sell it if you need to, move into a much more minimalistic way of living, into a 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, something, right, that you can do, you could potentially be able to move the needle a bit
Yeah.
on your budget, right? And then that idea of affording health insurance may not be as daunting, because it's not an assumption that they can't afford it, but actually looking at those real numbers.
What a great synopsis of. I mean, I've done 42 of these interviews, and I am telling you, this is the most we've ever drilled down on just really the finances of this idea
Mm.
of stepping out into this kind of the great unknown. And thank you so much for really unpacking that. And I encourage our listeners to kind of hit the pause button and go back and rewind and listen to that again and take notes, because I mean, what she did is she touched on all the areas of things that you need to kind of the broad overview, but the things you really need to look at, and things like, can you write off expenses as an independent contractor that you can as an employee? What are the different options with health insurance? How's your tax bracket going to be affected? What about the
Mm-hmm.
fact you don't need two cars anymore, do you? Could you get by with one car potentially? You could sell your house, rent it out. I mean, all the things that you listed
Yeah.
are just such great
And it's
things to look at.
practical, right? It's
Very
not brain
practical.
surgery, what we talked about, but people are
Absolutely.
always looking for this shortcut. They're looking for a
Yeah.
hack. What's a quick 6 figures in 6 months formula that I can, learn from, like a
Right.
step-by-step blueprint of someone else's Facebook ad that they sold you,
Yeah.
But practically, is that you just have to look at the inventory of your life,
Yep.
So, and that's what scares people a lot. So there's when fear arises, I find that people have this blanket statement, oh, I can't do that because I'm not smart enough, or I can't do that because that seems expensive. But
Mm.
it's an assumption. And with assumptions, it gives us, the prompt to go, well, what am I assuming that it could be true, but I don't have evidence of already. When I
Yeah.
say I have, like what I said to myself, I'm not allowed to quit until I make the same amount of salary.
Hmm.
That's just a blanket statement. I just
Yeah.
made that up.
Yeah.
I didn't really know, did I need 150 grand? Am I even making 150 grand? And what am I doing to make 150
Well,
grand?
somebody was
I
telling
didn't
you you're
really
making
drill down.
150 grand. Somebody
That's
told you
right.
that. And so, yeah,
That's right.
so yeah,
And it is a
absolutely.
status thing. I wanted to say I made six figures, but
Sure.
what does that matter,
Yeah.
in the span of, my life, right? And
Yeah.
so that honesty and that transparency, and looking at non-negotiable expenses versus negotiable expenses and really seeing what your break-even point is every month, then you can discuss with your spouse, can we actually live on one income? Perhaps,
Mm.
maybe. If we actually was mindful about our
Yeah.
spending, if we
Yeah.
minimalize, and all of a sudden doors open because you have real truths about what's going on with your life rather than this assumption that sort of fueled by fear.
And I tell you what, I could have hit the stop button right now, and we have packed this episode with so much value. And I mean, I think we overuse the term, value bombs, but that was a value bomb. I looked in Wikipedia, and it has the definition of value bomb, and that was it right there. So, Lydia, thank you for unpacking that. Let's transition just for a second here and talk a little bit about the job itself. So you kind of left the education corporate space you were in. You said you went kind of almost like a freelance consultant for them for a little while. Then you stepped out on your own, but you had kind of laid the groundwork and kind of paved the way for that transition. But what did it look like that first day that you kind of went off the corporate umbilical cord, and you're completely independent, and you're going, okay, was that, I mean, were you a quote digital nomad at that time, or were you still based in Canada and thinking, I'm just going to stay close, do my job here? What was the transition to kind of the where your geography broadened as well as your
Mm.
outlook on your occupation?
Yeah, I was still in Vancouver. The whole idea of digital nomadism wasn't even a part of my reality. Now, funny enough, at the time I had already read The 4 Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss
Yeah,
three times. Three
that'll
times I
that'll
read
mess you
this.
up.
Right. And to be honest, none of it, I mean, it clicked in to go, wow, that's an amazing life. Look at these mythical creatures called digital nomads that work out of, Thailand beach homes and so
These
forth.
unicorns,
But
that's right.
yeah, these unicorns. But I never related to them because, to be honest, I didn't see enough case studies in the book that
Hmm.
were like people like me, that
Hmm.
weren't coders, that weren't programmers, that
Sure.
weren't techie guys, that were sort
Yeah.
of these awesome millennials that could do it from, a hut in Costa Rica somewhere. I was service based. I was someone that, was a salesperson. I was a marketer. I was, a consultant of sorts, right? At the time, I didn't really see anyone doing it in that sort of model, right? Where I
Yeah.
needed to still see clients, or I thought I still needed to see clients physically. So when I was in
Hmm.
Vancouver, I rented a space in a co-working space, in town to appear professional, to have like
Sure.
a switchboard operator that would say, "Hello,
Conference
welcome
room
to
when you
Lydia
need
Lee's
one.
Consultant."
That's right.
Exactly, right? And so I would invite my clients there,
Yeah.
right? And worked there and then worked from home,
Hmm.
etc. And so that was sort of my formal way of having a business. And then I sort of reread that book again and started actually joining groups in digital
Yeah.
nomadism and actually meeting someone. I was on a trip to Malaysia, actually, where I came from. And I met a German guy who was a marketing consultant that told me he worked 6 months out of the year in Southeast Asia. And it piqued
Hmm.
my interest because I resonated with him.
Yeah.
And he was sort of doing a job like mine. And then I said, how do you do that? What do you do to see clients? And sort of just planting that seed and asking him a bunch of questions. And all of a sudden, that became a reality for me because I met someone real, not
Hmm.
just from a book, that allowed me to
Yeah.
see that this lifestyle could be possible if I just created different systems, right, of managing my clients, managing that communication, still being great and professional, but not necessarily being physically there. So that seed got planted in my head, but I never did anything about it just yet. Now, after my first year of business, actually, after my first 6 months of the first agency
Hmm.
business, I started to all of a sudden go into the second slump of depression, which was what we were talking about in the beginning of the podcast, which is I felt no meaning to the
Hmm.
actual agency I started. I was
Yeah.
good at it. I made good money. It was an easy transition,
Right.
but I still felt like this was a job.
Yeah.
Like I had to peel myself out of bed to get there and do something. And so I realized that actually what was the discomfort I was feeling was that I was selling products, traditional education, which was a value I did not believe in. I didn't believe in traditional education.
Mm.
I Not to say that there's no judgment there, but for me, I felt that my traditional education didn't prepare me for the real
Mm.
world. I actually needed more real life experience and real internships of life stuff
Exactly.
that allowed me to
Yeah.
do more. I didn't really use my degree that well. And so here I was selling university transferable programs for kids in China, like and banging the drum about to get a degree and how that's the most important thing you should have in your life when I didn't believe in it. So I felt like a fraud. That was
Wow.
actually what was the feeling. And I had to be honest with that, going, I'm here again, feeling unfulfilled, except that I'm the boss and I have no one to blame now. And that set me to another motion of questioning.
Uh,
Again, different door, not a bad thing,
mhm.
needed to deal with it, right?
Yeah.
So then I started a blog called Screw the Cubicle, which was really, to be honest, initially to document my identity crisis, going through transition, figuring out what it felt like to be a new entrepreneur and learning all these things without any evidence that other people around me could
Right.
succeed, and what that felt like. And that blog kind of took off in the sense of getting viewership.
Yep.
And it wasn't until a woman from Toronto who was a lawyer messaged me one day and said, I love reading your blog. I love the idea of dishonesty that you tell about, not success stories, but the pain that you go through
Mm.
when you have this identity crisis. And I was wondering, do you coach anyone on career transition? And I went, what's a coach? And so I had to Google it. I was like, this is a therapist of sort. I'm way too blunt to be a therapist. So what do I need to do? Is it an advisor, a mentor? How does this work?
Look, we're
And
not
I
going
thought,
to do any
why
group
don't I
hugs
just
here. That's
no
right.
group hugs, no eye gazing. That's not my style. So I thought, how can I continue to give that same voice that I did to my blog, where I was honest, and is a difficult road. I'm willing to
Mm,
hold
yeah.
your hand, but you got to be accountable for yourself.
Yeah.
It ain't woo woo, and there's no tricks to this. Now, if you're willing to do that, then I might be willing to quote unquote coach you. And so I decided, how do I know if I want to be a coach? Do I want to certify myself? Do I care about certifying myself? Can I make coaching my own thing? And I didn't know until I did the job. So instead of this added pressure of like having an offer and charging it right away, I said, why don't I dedicate 2 months to experimentation, right? Creating a bit of a beta test on like almost like a little internship for
Sure.
myself to take on some free clients to sort of see what can I do in this space? What am I willing to coach on? What are the boundaries of topics I'm willing to coach
Right.
on? I wasn't willing to coach on business at the time because I hadn't proven myself yet as a business
Mm.
owner. So that felt wrong to do that. But what I didn't know a lot about was the transition phase. I didn't know what it felt like to do those negotiations with
Yep.
employers. I didn't know what it feels like to take inventory of my entire life and figure out my truths. I didn't know what it felt like to, get my emotional resilience ready for that change. So I said, I will talk about this piece of the pie. And I don't know where that's going to go, but I'm going to help you as much as I can for free. And I took on 8 guinea pigs in a span of 2 months and experimented with what that felt like. And that was an excellent way to experiment
That's
without
great.
that
Yeah.
pressure of making money,
Yeah.
right? And did it kind of willingly and discovered who I wanted to work with. Half of those people I would never work with again because they wanted different things, and I wasn't able to provide. But there were
Right.
some that I had really meaningful conversations with. I felt great about that relationship. And actually, it helped me formulate my first offer,
Yeah.
right? And that became sort of my teaching point, what I went through about setting up a beta test,
Mm.
before you quit your job, and experimenting with getting clients and
Right.
knowing how to work on a new career before you quit. That became sort of my bread and butter
And finding
when
your
I left.
avatar.
Yeah.
I mean,
And
who
my
was your
avatar,
avatar
yeah.
that you wanted to coach? That's right.
Totally. It wasn't
Yeah.
just anyone that
Right.
wanted to quit their jobs. It's just every Dick and Harry,
Yeah.
So where I really focused on was the motivation. What was the motivation to quit? Because I realized that I wasn't interested to help people that just wanted to quit to go and live on like a hammock somewhere in the
Mhm.
beach, because that felt also unmeaningful. What I was actually trying to do in my message was reinvent the idea of work. What if work wasn't a dirty word? What
Mm.
if work wasn't just a salary and an income?
Yeah.
What if work could be a sense of contribution? It could be a sense of purpose that you could be rewarded for giving value and solving problems, but have an impact, right? You leave this world with a job or a mission that allows you to feel that you've contributed to some way to a
Right.
cause that you believed in. However you did it, and that idea of meaning was where I wanted to plant the seed of right away so that people didn't make the same mistake I did, which was just choosing any business that was easy to start, but actually coming back to the same question again of what's the purpose of this entire thing.
But nothing up to that point was wasted. I mean, you can
Correct.
look back
Totally.
even probably through university to your, you maybe had an internship that led to your corporate gig, and then you stayed there for a while.
100%.
But you can see everything in those windows of time that kind of made you who you were, that enabled you to speak into, the lives of the people
Mm,
you coach versus, I mean, how many times on Facebook do you see a 22-year-old life coach? And you're
Right.
going, I'm, I'm sorry, you can't, you're not qualified to be a life coach yet. You have to
Right.
live at
Or pick
least a
something,
certain, yeah,
pick a focus that you
sure,
actually
that's
have
right.
evidence,
Right. You can talk
evidence
about
of producing.
teenagers, but you can't be a life coach, yeah,
Right.
for
That's
anybody
right.
older
Exactly.
than 18. So yeah,
That's
that's
right.
that is great. So right now you're pretty much your full-time gig is coaching, right?
hmm
So
Yeah, I
do you do
coach and I
anything
teach.
beyond that,
It's
beyond
been
that?
yeah, it's been a bit of a hybrid to be honest. Like what I realized was I do like to coach, but I also love to build communities and I love to actually host experiences.
Mm,
So a lot of my work has gone from digital coaching
hmm.
to running a digital academy, which is my online school that
Right.
allows actually me to not only be the only one with all the answers, where I actually design and facilitate an experience where the people that are students of that experience get to contribute as well as advisors and mentors to other people. And I think that allows people to be empowered rather than
Hmm.
be just only be a student of absorbing information,
Right.
but that everyone has, it's almost like a collective intelligence of people that have multiple talents from different areas, right? That come into the space with the same intention,
Hmm.
right, of doing something different with their lives, but they can actually contribute as well some of their talents into the mix. And that makes me feel better than
Yeah.
not being the guru of something, and actually being just like I'm one of the expertise that you'll get, but there's all these other people we get to learn from, which I think
Mm.
was really important for me to design that kind of experience. And also now I live in Bali. I mean, after my first year and a half of being an entrepreneur,
Hmm.
I did decide to take the show on the road to experiment with a 6 month sabbatical in Southeast Asia that ended up now being 5 years. Me being here, how quickly that can change. And I've been in Bali for the last 5 years. I've set my home is in Bali. The roosters hasn't croaked yet this morning, but that would have been what you would have been hearing. And so I split my time between Vancouver, Bali. I've been to Portugal. I pick new places to sort of live and work from every year, but I am based in Bali. So what I do every year now is also invite people to join me in Bali
Mm.
to come on a retreat. We talked about sabbaticals being such an
Right.
important
Exactly.
part of pause, right? Taking a pause in your life and
Yeah.
just reevaluating. This is the space that I sort of organize in Bali to help people have that pause, to not be distracted by their kids, what to make for dinner, their commutes at work, and come here and breathe a little,
Mm.
meet other people that are doing what you want to do, meet other people going through that same transition, and have that, really incubated space to really
Yeah.
think about what you want. And then you can go back and sort of have a clear action, but also understand the purpose behind your actions, which I think is really important.
I mean, I love that whole idea. And there was a lady that I interviewed. I'm thinking probably in the early 20s episode number. Her name is Alex Rufus, and she actually, I mean, she lives in the Netherlands, but she does these experiences in generally around the Mediterranean. But I mean, I get her pictures on Instagram of these exotic places that she's hanging out with this kind of cohort, of
Right.
kind of solopreneurs that are just sitting together and having a 1 or 2 week experience together and really just sharing life together. And it is really a
Mm.
cool idea of just kind of unplugging, and it really is a
The,
retreat setting.
Yeah,
It's
there's
not a
something really
classroom, it's a
beautiful about
retreat.
yeah, there's something really beautiful about extracting yourself from familiar
Yeah.
territory because we tend to rely on things comfortably. And comfort, to be honest, is what puts us getting us stuck as well in the
Mm.
first world.
Yeah.
Because it's not painful enough. Most of us are in a neutral position. And
Yep.
it's like, life isn't that bad yet. Like, yeah, it's not I'm not happy, but I'm not in the streets. So maybe I should be thankful, and not be entitled to do this. Where it's like I find that people that I work with is more in the sort of third world countries,
Mm.
they have more to there's more to risk, but then again to them it's like I have nothing to lose either, to really go all in. I find with North Americans and anyone from the first world country, we don't really go all in because our life is a little comfortable. It's a little bit on neutral,
No
so
doubt.
there's no sort of push to sometimes go out there and do something big,
Yep.
so that's a very interesting concept about too comfortable,
Yep.
right, to make a change. So when we, especially for me, when I said, hey, I want a location independent life, I want to be able to raise my family abroad, right, not being in traditional education and lifestyles, that I
Yeah.
have to go out of traditional
Mm.
environments to learn what's out there, what is available in alternative education, for
Right.
example. I can't find that in Vancouver. So I have to literally remove myself physically and meet other people that are homeschooling their kids, that are living in other places that I've never thought about, that has resources and people to connect with. And that makes it real. It makes it a
Yeah.
reason to start it, because when I'm in Bali, I do have to figure out systems. I do have to figure out, how do I work with people in North America and Europe without being there?
Exactly.
How do I
What's
get
the
that to
time
happen?
difference? Yeah.
Exactly. Whereas in Vancouver, I could easily be comfortable again, keep seeing them at that co-working space, that
Yeah.
I rented. But it challenged me in a good way to be physically here to figure stuff out. And I think that's a really special way to accelerate your learning in a way to be in that environment right away.
I love the way that you kind of wrap that up with you kind of talked yourself through your life transition, what it's led to, and what it has culminated in right now. I mean, I want to pick your brain just a little bit about. So you coached a number of people and you've kind of walked through this kind of a elongated transition period to get where you are today. What would you say would be like? What are the one or two biggest obstacles or pain points that you encountered that you either encountered today or in that transition, in that journey? You said these are the two biggies. These two are just nearly impossible to overcome because I mean I love the idea in your retreat or in your course you said you wanted the kind of the proactive engagement of the people that are participating. We want to do the same thing here at Rising Tide. We want to have our listeners participate in the feedback portion of this. So
Sure.
so give me a pain point or two that you think, hey, this is what I hear over and over again, or this is what I experienced over and over again as far as just this making this transition of kind of the digital nomad.
hmm Well, the first thing is it's a very sexy trend right now, this digital nomad term,
Absolutely.
right? Like
Yeah.
where there's, if you go to any Instagram hashtag for digital nomad, all you'll see is people with laptops in fancy places.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that is the dream, right? But what is missing in that message is what it takes to get to that hammock,
Yep.
right? And actually, when you are at that hammock, how do you sustain
Yep.
that lifestyle? Here's the reality. I've been living in Bali a long time to see many people come in and out of this island that
Absolutely.
come into this fantasy of starting a digital nomad journey, but not preparing for it and still going on a holiday, really. And then I didn't find anything I was looking for and
Had my
need to go
work
home.
holiday. Yeah.
Right. I needed to go home 3 to 6 months later and get a job, and that's disappointing for a lot of people that came out and hoping that inspiration will smack up in the middle of the head. Now, this is why the unsexy advice I always give is don't actually leave or actually start to give up everything until you've prepared for that when you are actually feeling safe. So when we are working, even though that's not the place we want to end up, it does feel secure, right? And so sort of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? The baseline needs we need is survival, right? Like a roof over our head, food on the table, right? Our families around us, that comfort zone that is required for us to make big changes because change is scary.
Yep.
And we have a very unstable foundation. Creativity and passion cannot brew from that place.
Right.
So we have to make sure we are safe first in some way. So similar to what we talked about preparing that environment, whether it's looking at your financial numbers, speaking to your spouse about this change and how he or she can support you, negotiating
Yep.
time off, right? Having sabbaticals, like crafting time to actually work on your escape plan, whatever
Exactly.
that may be. We have to just set the tone, set the stage for the change to happen, not dive into it with the same schedule we've had in the past, because that's just not going to work. So we have to really take that inventory of what we need to change, shift, and expand in order to, right, release time and headspace for us to now start this journey. What fears and obstacles do I perceive happening that could sabotage me, that will probably talk me out of things? What are those things that I have to answer to first? Right? Before I jump
Right.
headfirst into this journey.
Right.
That's the first thing. Now, the second point that most people will then ask is, great, I want to leave my job. What am I going to do to make an income? Great, practical, logical question.
That's a
You do
great
need to
question.
know what you're going to do to make money. And so the mistake I see a lot of people make, because they're, again, inspired by a lot of digital nomads, of other entrepreneurs, and, maybe even people that they hear on your podcast. And that's great to kickstart the inspiration. But where the inspiration starts to get unhelpful is when they try to emulate someone else completely, in exactly the same way. They're like, let's do exactly what Lydia did to launch a coaching business and do exactly what Lydia would do to coach. But that's not
That's a
who they
great
are.
point.
Right? So again, get that inspiration, and you might ask yourself the question and say, hey, what part of Lydia's story, or what part of the way that she works, or how she markets, or what she's created that helps me understand that I have that quality too, that I actually already possess that quality. There's no one to emulate. It's just shining a light that I already possess that quality. That's why I admire that person and not admire the other one. There's a reason for that. We have to own that. We have to go, I actually already have that quality. So you don't feel unconfident about it, that you have to copy someone, right? That mirror is just simply telling you that's the gift you also have, but you have to feel that you have it, right? And when we think about a business to start or a freelance career that we should go into, or, what's the next passion project I might continue to experiment with, it's got to be something that you can see yourself doing in the sense of having that deep interest. I think deep interest really counts for sustainability.
Yep.
You can learn all the tricks of how to launch an online course or start a podcast or do whatever. But if the topics that you are creating, right, or solving problems for, isn't really the deep interest you have, that you can really see yourself talking about it every day, you already see yourself in a way obsessed with it in some way, or see yourself talking about it in conversation all the time, very likely you're going to have to really muster that, like interest all the time, every day, to show up and create that awesome blog if you don't have that deep interest. So recognizing where those deep interests are, recognizing why you feel the need to really contribute to that problem, or sometimes a cause, right, that just is happening in your community right now that you want to like contribute some of your genius to. Need to know that purpose and why right away.
But it needs to be sustainable,
and,
right?
And it has to be sustainable. And that's a GPS in a way that helps us to recognize the creativity of what it is that we want to create to contribute to that solving of that problem. Right. So that podcast, who you decide to recruit to come into your podcast, or what topics you decide to talk about, that's all really brewed from that GPS of that this is a cause I actually really believe in. Not just it's going to make me money, not just because it's the newest trend in the market, but because that I can see my life's work in some way in that trajectory, right? That focus of what I feel like I want to do for work, and still being flexible that my work might change. Right. But that cause is really, occurring in my life right now, and allowing that to be, flexible for the future. So starting a business that is going to be something you want to start, but not only that, but it's going to leverage your strengths, right? Some people are not great interviewees and they may never start a podcast. You don't need to start a podcast to be the only way to make a living, right? You don't need to only be a coach. That's the only way to make a living. Find your role. Right? If you are a better writer and you want to write books, that may be the way to go. Or that you're a better teacher, you want to facilitate a course or do a retreat, that's more of a model that's best for you. But make sure you know that you're doing it based on your strengths.
That's so good. And I just, as you were talking, I'm thinking about, the whole idea of being a podcast host. I mean, the thing that is sustainable in this is because it is an ever-changing environment. I mean, every time I talk to somebody, it's a new story. And the challenge of trying to draw their story out and ask good questions, and ask, kind of probing questions, and questions that are follow up to things that they've said that are really interesting. But I love the way you kind of frame that, and this idea that, passion has to have some level of perseverance, to really be effective. I mean,
love how you say
if you're
that.
just passionate about something for a very short period of time, then you're going to lose that motivating factor that is going to drag you out of bed on that day that you don't feel like getting up and writing that blog post. You don't feel like getting up and coaching that client in an hour or whatever. But if it's something that really drives you, from a
100%.
very deep place, I mean, that's a whole different level of motivation. And I think people experience that.
Yeah, don't you think products will change, right? Screw the Cubicle's had probably like 20 different offers since it's sort of been birthed, right? And that's because I've changed as a human.
Right.
I've expanded my expertise. I've grown my mastery in certain areas, right, of expertise. And those are the things you start to offer, ongoing, right? Like that's why the mission and the drive and the message is the most important, because that's the heartbeat of your work. And you can actually never, you could shut down this podcast and start something new, and that same audience would follow you there because the message is still there. The message is still the thing that's creating that connection with you. So you could have multiple products, you could have multiple things that you actually end up selling as part of your business, but that communal value, right? That communal message of what we're hoping to do together, as a transformation, follows with you in the products that you create. So you're no longer, pigeonholed into just this is all I'm known for, and not being able to have that expansion of your work, your body of work, right? That can be so much more beautiful in the future.
I really love the way you have kind of framed that, because this is not just an interview about, your path and the kind of the life's journey you've been on, but you're really speaking. I mean, you're answering questions, but you're also coaching listeners at the same time. So, we're getting a free coaching session here, right? Through the whole interview. And I mean, I could talk to you literally all night long, but I love these topics. As we kind of wrapping up our conversation here. I really want to drill down and just so we're going to have one line answers here to these last things. I really want to get inside your head here, and then I want to give you space to kind of wrap it up at the end and
Cool.
let people know how to catch you or how to find you online. But so if you had to tell me somebody online that really inspires you, give me their name and that one line of why they inspire you. What's that one person that would come to
Well,
mind?
this one person was the person that was a part of my journey without her knowing it, and now actually my personal coach at the moment as well. It's gone full circle. And this person that I was following, her name's Pam Slim. She's an
Yeah,
amazing author. Her first book was Escape from Cubicle
exactly.
Nation,
That's right. I've
which
read
is a
it.
book that I've read when I was in corporate. And then she also has a book that was about, I think, 2 years ago. She wrote it called Body of Work, which I
Mm,
really love. What an amazing follow-up book to Escape from Cubicle Nation. And I followed her work for many years. And what I really respect about Pam is that she walks the talk of, like, again,
yeah.
when she talks about building your body of work, she is consistently building her body of work. And what I love about her is it doesn't matter how successful she is, and she's very successful. She's very grounded in her work in the sense of that she's not hiding behind an automated funnel, or she's not
Right.
hiding
Exactly.
behind just this sort of like, you can't reach me, I'm an influencer of this caliber now. She really does talk to her clients. She really does. When you work with her, she invites, I just spent 2 days in Phoenix in her home,
Mm,
coaching with her at her space. I should have been in a hotel room, which is usually what happens, but she invited me to her home to spend time with her family. And you're like, wow, this is not someone that would do
yeah.
that. Like, they'll have boundaries
It's
around
the
that.
real
But
deal.
she's so committed to actually what she says she's going to do, that there's no drama and no ego in that work. And I really respect that about her as a business owner. And so she's my coach right now, and she's really empowering me to actually do good work rather than look good, is to actually do good work.
Mm,
And I love her idea of building communities, building sustainable people, not just fans and followers that are subscribing to your work, but letting them have this ecosystem,
right.
where they can actually enhance your work by sharing it and by being part of that collective intelligence we spoke about, and recruiting these people to also be teachers and, be influencers in your community,
Yeah.
and having more than just one influencer in that group.
That is the book she mentioned, Escape Cubicle Nation, is really a good read, and it's a very
It's
timely
excellent.
message, even though it was written what 12 years ago. I mean,
Totally.
it's still as timely today. If you had a life quote, what would it be that really
I'm
drives
not
you?
sure who. Yeah, it's been a quote that was in my head for many years, and it slips my mind who wrote this, but you might have to Google this,
No.
or maybe I just saw it in a blog somewhere that someone wrote. But it's a line that says, "What you do in anything is what you do in everything." And that is a whole mindset shift that I've had to really adapt to. When I was any time that I've been scared to do anything, and the way that I approach that fear and what I do in that micro moment of a decision affects actually a lot of my macro decisions. So
Mm,
if I want to be brave, a year from today, and I want to leave my job a year from today, I have to instill that sense of braveness in these micro decisions I make today. So
yeah,
even being
that's
brave
good.
about saying no to people, or not taking on that overtime, even if I could,
Right.
that is an act of bravery, an act of self-love, an act of, advocating for myself in order to prepare myself for this bigger mission of leaving my job, which requires this sort of mentality, right? To say
Mm,
no often and say more yeses to things that you want, right? You don't just become that person at that end of that goal, because it doesn't work that way. It's all these micro decisions that you make. And those micro decisions could be internal.
yep.
It could be things you're saying to
Absolutely.
yourself every time you have that change that makes it real or not real for yourself, right? So I always remember that quote every time I'm about to do something. I'm like, this is the time you are making this mark for yourself. You're either going to tell yourself this can't be done with this horrible naysayer attitude, or you're going to do one small thing to change that mindset of yours, even if it's not a big step, because that's going to help you get to the bigger step. So that quote is really a huge one that resonates with me every time I make changes.
Well, I will certainly have that in the show notes, and we will find out who the author was of that quote. And as we wrap up today, so tell us where we can find you online, and let's just wrap it up with one line of advice that you would give your startup self if you could go back 5 years or go back 2 years. You pick the time frame, how far you go back, but just one line of thing. This is what I wish I knew,
Mm.
and then how can we
Well,
find you online?
Yeah. So the one thing that I would have told myself when I was going through that transition, probably when I first started my first side hustle of that
Hmm.
agency in that industry, is actually not to rush things. To actually prepare,
Mm.
this batch of time to learning and discovery, so that things are less pressured. Because I'm a Type A
Yeah.
perfectionist, a lot of my default mechanism to overcome fear is to do. Right, to act. But sometimes there's a nice place to just breathe and take a pause so that your actions are purposeful and your actions are conscious, in
Mm.
a lot of way whenever you do it. I felt that I rushed it a lot, which got me to where I needed to go, but
Yep.
in a headspace and a mental unwellness, I find that didn't need to be that way.
Mm.
And so take that pause. Don't leave corporate right away. Like take that time to have that mini sabbatical for yourself to figure out what you want, figure out what doesn't work, and do a little bit more of that and test things before you launch, right? Do that inaugural experimentation. Let yourself play with different ideas, different businesses, actually, without having a website. Just start helping people for free. And that can be that personal internship that we mentioned about before you
Mm.
put all your eggs in one basket, right?
Right.
Of having a website and investing into your business. So
It's a
where
lean
people can find
startup,
me, just
right?
sort of is a lean startup mentality,
Yeah.
and it doesn't cost a lot, but just your time and your effort, right?
Exactly.
And so I talk a lot about this in a lot of my free resources I give to people in Screw the Cubicle. So the best way to find me is screwthecubicle.com. There's tons of free courses. I have a free video series there that helps you prepare for that transition, including that financial analysis we talked about.
Yeah. Wow.
That's part and parcel of that free course to get your numbers right, to get your, knowing what your deep interests are, all the things we talked about in this podcast. I can give you the full direct link for it as well, if that makes it easier for people to take that course. And then there's another course called Create My dream business, to really understand what business you should start based on your strengths, so that you're not right just having this comparison analysis to other people. And just sign up for things on our website. If you subscribe, I have free trainings every month that I do on my Facebook page that really helps people overcome imposter syndrome,
Oh, that's
overcome that
great.
fear of transition. It's not always about business matters that
Right.
are actually what's scary to people. They think that's the problem. A lot of it is the individual, it's the human behind that business that's getting stuck, and we have to answer to that. What happens emotionally in that transition that nobody wants to talk about because it doesn't sound very sexy, but it's actually the thing that allows you to then do the business stuff. That is
Oh.
important to you. So come say hi at screwthecubicle.com. I literally reply to every email that comes over to me. That's not an auto robot that do it. I adapted Pam's very sustainable, organic way of connection that I dedicate time every week to answer emails.
Mm.
So let me know if you enjoyed this podcast, and I would love to know what you got out of it.
Well, I told you before we got online that you were one of the first that I actually kind of stalked online, on early stages, just to kind of as I'm just exploring this whole idea of kind of solo startups and working remotely and the whole package and I mean I've learned a great deal from you just from your videos and other things. So I'm very grateful for you taking the time tonight and just sharing with our audience and just really playing your part in just helping all boats rise in a rising tide. Lydia, thanks
Yeah,
again
thank
for
you for
joining
having
us.
me.
Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Kevin.
Take care.